The end didn't happen in a hospital bed surrounded by weeping loved ones. It happened at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, in a cubicle that smelled of ozone from the laser printer and cold leftover Thai food. My chest tightened first. A vice grip beneath my sternum. I ignored it. I had 40 slides to finish for the Apex presentation, the project that was supposed to save the department, the project my boss, Marcus, had assured me would finally get me that VP promotion. My left arm went numb. The pixels on my dual monitor swam, blurring into a headache that throbbed behind my eyes like a bass drum. "Just push through, Clara," I whispered to myself. My voice sounded dry, brittle, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. I reached for my lukewarm coffee mug, my fourth since midnight. My hand spasmed. The ceramic hit the desk with a deafening clack, spilling the brown sludge over weeks of notes. Then, the vice crushed. I couldn't breathe. The air in the office, recycled and stale, wouldn't enter my lungs. I tried to stand, to call for help, but my legs were water. I collapsed onto the thin commercial carpet. The fibers were rough against my cheek. The hum of the server closet down the hall sounded like a roaring ocean. The last thing I saw was a pair of polished Italian leather shoes stopping near my head. Marcus. He had come back for something he forgot. He nudged my shoulder with his toe. "Clara, you better not be sleeping down there. The client needs those projections by 8 a.m. I couldn't answer. The roar swallowed me. The darkness wasn't peaceful. It was cold, final, and terrifyingly empty. Gasp. Air tore into my lungs. Not the stale office air, but something sharper, cold. It smelled of expensive floral arrangements and floor wax. My eyes snapped open. I was sitting upright. My hands were gripping the mahogany armrests of a chair so tightly my knuckles were white. I wasn't on the floor. I wasn't dead. I looked around wildly. Sunlight, bright and real, streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I knew this room. It was Conference Room B, on the 42nd floor of Sterling and Finch Advertising. "Are you quite finished zoning out, Clara?" The voice hit me like a physical blow. I turned my head slowly. Marcus sat at the head of the table. He looked exactly the same as he had when his shoe nudged my dying body. Perfect, expensive suit in charcoal gray. Hair gelled into an immovable helmet of brown. A gold watch glinting on his wrist. The one he bought with the bonus from the last project I did for him. But he was younger here. Not by much, maybe 2 years. His face was slightly less puffy, his eyes less shadowed by the impending failure of the company. I looked down at myself. I was wearing the navy blazer I had thrown away a year ago because of a coffee stain. I checked my phone lying on the table. October 14th, 2 years ago. The date burned into my retinas. This was the day it all started. The day Marcus assigned me the Apex project. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. The phantom sensation of the crushing weight returned to my chest. I started to hyperventilate. "Clara?" Marcus leaned forward, a flicker of annoyance crossing his perfectly curated features. I said, "The Apex account. It's finally ours to lose." The smell hit me then, his cologne. A heavy, muskin leather scent that was supposed to convey power but always just smelled like desperate ambition to me. It was the smell of late nights, of him leaning over my shoulder critiquing work he couldn't do himself. The smell of the shoes standing over me as I died. I gripped the armrests harder, grounding myself against the wood grain. I forced a swallow past the lump of terror in my throat. I was back. How, why, it didn't matter. I was here, and I knew what happened next. In my previous life, 5 minutes from now, I would jump at the chance. I would beg him to let me lead Apex. I would see it as my golden ticket. And 2 years later, it would kill me. and he would step over my body to claim the credit for the parts that worked and blame me for the parts that didn't. Apex wasn't a project. It was a meat grinder. The client was impossible, the budget was fictitious, and the deadlines were designed to break human beings. Marcus knew that. He wanted me to break, so he could look like the savior when he picked up the pieces. Earth to Clara. Marcus snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp, like cracking bone in the quiet room. I looked him dead in the eyes. The panic began to recede, replaced by something cold and hard, settling deep in my stomach like a stone. "I'm here, Marcus," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "Good. As I was saying, the CEO wants a lead on this immediately. It's high profile, high risk, high reward. Naturally, I thought of you. You're my workhorse. Workhorse, not partner, not talent. An animal to be driven until it dropped." He slid a thick manila folder across the polished mahogany table. It stopped inches from my hands. I stared at it. The edges were sharp. Inside were the initial briefs that would eventually lead to my 3 a.m. heart attack. I didn't touch it. "Well?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. A smarmy smile played on his lips. He expected gratitude. He expected desperation. "Are you ready to step up to the big leagues, Clara?" I remembered the feeling of the carpet fibers against my cheek. I remembered his shoe nudging me. I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. The leather creaked. No. The silence in the room grew thick. The hum of the HVAC system seemed to get louder. Marcus's smile froze, then slowly curdled into confusion. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, Marcus. I can't take the lead on Apex." His eyes narrowed. The charming facade cracked, revealing the petty tyrant underneath. "Don't be absurd. This is the opportunity you've been whining for." "I haven't been whining," I said coolly, observing him like a specimen under glass. "I've been asking for appropriate compensation for my output. This is different. My current caseload is already at maximum capacity. Taking on Apex would be irresponsible. I would burn out. I did burn out. I died." "Burn out?" he scoffed, a short, ugly puff of air. "You don't get to burn out, Clara. You do what I tell you." "Not this time." I kept my voice monotone. No emotion, no openings. I've reviewed my bandwidth. I cannot deliver the quality Apex requires without sacrificing my existing accounts. I won't do it. He stared at me, truly stunned. He was used to me being a golden retriever, desperate for a pat on the head. He didn't know how to handle a brick wall. He stood up, walking around the table. He stood over me, using his height to intimidate. The smell of leather and musk intensified, clogging my nostrils. I fought the urge to gag. "Listen to me," he hissed, leaning down close to my ear. I could feel the heat of his breath. "You refuse this, and you're done. No promotion, no bonus. You'll be stuck doing junior copy tweaks until you rot." In my last life, that threat would have terrified me. Now, it sounded like salvation. Junior copy tweaks meant going home at 5 p.m. "I understand your position," I said, not looking up at him, focusing on the grain of the table wood. He huffed in frustration and stalked away to the window, looking out over the city sprawling below. He needed a lead. He needed someone to take the fall if it went wrong, and someone to do the work if it went right. He turned back to me, his eyes cold. "If you won't step up, I'll have to find someone who will. Someone hungry." Then, the idea sparked in his eyes. I saw it happen. The greed overtook the anger. If I wouldn't do it, he would have to do it himself. Or at least, pretend to. He wanted the glory of Apex. He always had. He just didn't want the work. "Fine," Marcus spat, adjusting his silk tie. "If you're going to be useless, I'll take the lead myself. I'll show the CEO what real leadership looks like. You can handle the administrative overflow. Scheduling, printing. He was demoting me. He was giving himself the poisoned chalice. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to smile. "Are you sure, Marcus?" I asked, injecting a note of faux concern into my voice. Apex is notoriously difficult. The client is demanding. "Please," he waved a dismissive hand, walking back to the table and snatching up the folder. "I handled worse than them before you were even out of diapers. It's about managing expectations. It's about charisma. Something you clearly lack." He held the folder against his chest, like a shield. The trap was in his hands now. "Whatever you say, Marcus," I whispered. He didn't hear me. He was already mentally rehearsing his acceptance speech for the VP role. He looked at the folder with hunger, blind to the danger. "Just make sure my calendar is clear," he barked, already turning toward the door. "And get me a coffee. Black, 2 sugars." He walked out of the conference room, his shoes clicking sharply on the parquet flooring before hitting the hallway carpet. He held his head high, convinced he had just won a major victory. I remained in the chair. The sunlight felt warmer now. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs completely, savoring the simple act of respiration. The folder was gone. The weight was gone. I stood up slowly. My legs felt strong. I walked to the window where he had stood. The city looked different. Less like a prison, more like a landscape. I could smell the faint scent of rain coming through the building's ventilation. It was a clean smell. Marcus had the Apex project. He had the glory he wanted. He also had the impossible deadlines, the abusive client calls at midnight, the stress that ate away at your stomach lining until it stopped your heart. He had taken my death sentence, and he thought it was a prize. I turned away from the window and headed back toward the elevator. I wasn't going to get him coffee. I was going to go to my desk, do exactly 8 hours of work, and then I was going to go home and cook a real dinner. The game had changed. And for the first time, I wasn't the one holding the losing hand. Act 2. The first 3 months were almost comical in how perfectly they played out according to Marcus's delusions of grandeur. He was flying high. The initial phase of Apex was all high-level strategy. Lots of expensive lunches with the client, flashy PowerPoint presentations filled with buzzwords, and very little actual execution. Marcus excelled at this. I watched from the sidelines. My desk had been moved further away from the window, into a darker corner of the open-plan office, near the noisy break room. Marcus called it strategic repositioning for administrative support. I called it peace. I sat in my ergonomic chair, which I finally took the time to adjust properly, and listened to the office hum, the frantic clicking of keyboards, the sigh of the hydraulic door closer, the muffled shouts of account managers losing their minds on calls. It was a symphony of stress I was no longer conducting. Marcus would stride past my desk, always holding a Starbucks cup, the smell of stale coffee and that damn leather cologne trailing behind him like a noxious cloud. "Another late one tonight, team," he'd bellow, clapping his hands together. He looked energized, manic even. "Apex is eating up the hours, but the glory will be worth it. Clara, I need those meeting minutes formatted by EOD. By end of day, Marcus. 5 p.m. I'd reply calmly, not looking up from my spreadsheet. He'd bristle, his jaw tightening. Just get it done. I did get it done. At 4:45 p.m. And at 5 p.m. sharply, I put on my coat, a new wool trench coat I bought, because I wasn't spending my money on stress-eating takeout anymore, and walked out the door. The air outside the building always felt miraculously fresh, mixing with the city smells of roasted nuts and diesel fumes. It was the smell of freedom. I started gardening on my small apartment balcony. I bought terracotta pots that felt rough and cool under my fingertips. I planted basil, mint, and cherry tomatoes. The smell of the damp, dark soil was grounding. It was real life. contrasting sharply with the sterile, artificial environment of Sterling and Finch. Every evening, instead of answering panicked emails from Marcus, I watered my plants, watching the water darken the earth. But back in the glass tower, the cracks were starting to show. Month 4 was when the real work began. The execution phase. The client, a notorious tyrant named Mr. Henderson, started demanding results instead of slide decks. I saw the change in Marcus physically first. The perfectly gelled hair started to look a little frayed at the edges by 2 p.m. His expensive shirts began to show sweat stains under the arms, dark crescents of anxiety. I was in the break room getting tea herbal, caffeine-free, when I heard him on a call in the hallway. He wasn't shouting, he was pleading. "Mr. Henderson, I assure you, the deliverables are on track. We just encountered a minor. Yes, I understand the deadline is Friday. Yes, Please don't use that language, sir." There was a long silence, then the sound of a phone being slammed down onto a receiver. Marcus walked into the break room. He didn't see me at first in the corner. He leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on his face, ruining his makeup base. He gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles turned yellow. He looked up and saw me in the reflection of the paper towel dispenser. He jumped, spinning around. His eyes were wide, bloodshot around the edges. "How long have you been standing there?" he snapped, his voice tight. "Just getting tea, Marcus." I slowly dunked the tea bag. The steam warmed my face, smelling of chamomile and honey. He stared at me, and for a second, the mask slipped completely. I saw sheer, unadulterated panic. He was drowning, and he knew it. "Apex," he said, his voice rough. The volume is higher than anticipated. Henderson is being unreasonable." "I warned you he was demanding," I said softly, taking a sip of my tea. The ceramic mug was warm in my hands. "Yes? Well?" He straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. The smell of his fear, a sour, metallic tang mixed with the leather cologne, was pungent in the small room. It made my stomach churn with a phantom memory of my own stress. I took another sip of tea to wash it down. "I need you to take some of the load, Clara," he said, trying to sound authoritative but failing. "Just the vendor management side. The technical specs, you used to be good at that detail work." This was it. The attempt to pull me back into the trap. "I'm sorry, Marcus," I said, setting my mug down on the counter with a soft clink. "As we discussed, my current role is administrative support. I don't have the technical clearance or the bandwidth for vendor management on Apex." "I'm giving you the clearance. I'm your boss." His voice rose, cracking slightly. "And HR has my job description on file. If I take on higher-level duties, we would need to renegotiate my title and compensation, which would require VP approval. Do you want me to schedule a meeting with them?" I knew he didn't. Going to HR would mean admitting he couldn't handle the project he'd arrogantly claimed. His jaw worked silently. He hated me in that moment. He hated me because I was right, and he hated me because I was calm. "Fine," he snarled. "Be useless. Just make sure the conference room is booked for the quarterly review tomorrow. Don't screw that up." He stormed out. I watched him go. He was walking faster now, jerky movements lacking the smooth arrogance of 3 months ago. The escalation began in earnest over the next few weeks. Marcus started missing smaller deadlines. He blamed his team, firing 2 junior associates in a rage. The atmosphere in the department grew toxic. People walked on eggshells. The silence was heavy, broken only by Marcus's occasional outbursts from his glass-walled office. I observed it all like a scientist, studying a collapsing ecosystem. One Tuesday afternoon, I had to drop off some printed contracts on his desk. His office was a disaster zone. Takeout boxes piled high, smelling of cold grease. Stacks of paper, Red Bull cans crushing the life out of his expensive coasters. Marcus was staring at his monitor, tugging at his hair. He looked 10 years older. His skin was gray under the fluorescent lights, The projections aren't matching the budget, he mumbled to himself, not acknowledging my presence. Henderson is going to crucify me. The algorithm is flawed. Why is it flawed? I glanced at the screen. I recognized the spreadsheet instantly. It was the main budget tracker. I saw the error immediately, a misplaced decimal in cell G42 that was compounding across the entire workbook. In my last life, I would have fixed it in 30 seconds and saved his skin. I placed the contracts on the only clear spot on his desk. The sound of the paper hitting the wood made him jump. Contracts are ready for signature, Marcus. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy. Clara, the numbers, they're wrong. You're good with numbers. Just look at this for 5 minutes. His voice was desperate. He was begging. I clasped my hands in front of me. The fabric of my cotton shirt felt soft against my skin. I'm afraid that falls outside my administrative duties, Marcus. Perhaps you should ask Sarah in accounting? Sarah is an idiot! He slammed his fist on the desk. A lukewarm cup of coffee sloshed over the rim, staining a stack of papers brown. I need you. The smell of the spilled coffee hit me. Stale, acidic. It was the smell of my death. For a split second, the room spun. My heart gave a painful thud. No, not this time. I dug my fingernails into my palms, the sharp pain grounding me in the present. I need to go sanitize the break room fridge, Marcus. It's on my schedule. I turned and walked out of his office. Behind me, I heard a choked sound of rage, followed by the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. I didn't look back. I went to the break room. I put on yellow rubber gloves that smelled of latex and powder. I began to scrub the shelves of the refrigerator. The cold air bit at my cheeks. The smell of bleach was clean, harsh, and purifying. Marcus was dissolving. The pressure of Apex, the monster he had invited into his life, was consuming him from the inside out. He had taken the bait, swallowed the hook, and now the line was being reeled in, and I was just the janitor, wiping away the grime, watching the inevitable happen. Act 3. The end came on a rainy Thursday in November, the day of the live Apex launch. The atmosphere on the 42nd floor was brittle enough to snap. The air conditioning was cranked too high to combat the body heat of 50 stressed employees, making the air frigid. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city outside into gray streaks. The main boardroom had been transformed into a theater for the execution. A massive screen took up one wall. Rows of chairs were filled with the company's executives, the C-suite predators in their $5,000 suits, murmuring quietly, smelling of expensive soap and judgment. In the front row sat Mr. Henderson, the client. He was a small man who seemed dense with anger, like a dying star. He sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the blank screen, tapping a gold pen against his knee in a relentless, nerve-wracking rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I stood at the back of the room near the catering table, ostensibly to manage the coffee supply. I wore a simple gray cardigan that felt warm and safe. I held a ceramic saucer in my hands, feeling its cool smoothness. Marcus was at the podium. If he looked bad before, he looked necrotic now. He had clearly lost weight. His suit hung off his frame. Despite the freezing room, sweat beaded on his forehead, gleaming under the recessed track lighting. His hands, gripping the sides of the podium, were shaking so violently the wood vibrated slightly. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began. His voice was a cracked husk of its former booming baritone. He cleared his throat, wincing. Today, we present Apex, the future of targeted market integration. He clicked the remote. The screen behind him flared to life with the Apex logo. It was slightly off-center. A murmur went through the executives. Marcus flinched. He began his presentation. It was painful. He stumbled over words. He mixed up metrics. He was operating on zero sleep and pure terror. The smell of his anxiety, that sour, sweaty leather funk, seemed to fill the massive room, overpowering the scent of fresh coffee and pastries. Mr. Henderson's tapping stopped. That was worse. "Marcus," Henderson interrupted, his voice quiet, but cutting through the room like a razor. "Skip the preamble. Show me the live beta test. Show me the algorithm working in real time." Marcus froze. "Sir, we usually save the live demo for the end." "Now," Henderson said. One word, a command. Marcus looked like he might vomit. He shakily clicked the mouse on the podium laptop. The screen changed to a loading bar. "Connecting to server." The bar crawled forward. 20%. 40%. The room held its breath. I took a slow sip of water. The glass was cold against my lips. At 89%, the bar stopped. A spinning wheel of death appeared. Marcus clicked frantically. Nothing. "Just a moment," he whispered, sweat running into his eyes now. "Minor technical glitch. It's the building Wi-Fi." "It's hardwired, Marcus," the CTO said from the second row, his voice bored. Suddenly, the screen flashed red. Error codes scrolled down aggressively, lines of incomprehensible white text on a crimson background. Then, it crashed to the desktop. Silence. Absolute, total silence, save for the rain hammering against the glass like accusatory fingers. Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The silence he created was louder than any scream. $75 million, Henderson said softly. He looked at Marcus, not with anger, but with utter disgust, like he was looking at something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. "You have wasted $75 million of my capital on a PowerPoint presentation and a broken calculator. Mr. Henderson, please, if you give me another week," Marcus begged, holding his hands out. "You're finished," Henderson said. He turned to the CEO of Sterling and Finch. "Our contract is void due to non-delivery. My lawyers will be in touch about breach damages." Henderson walked out. The sound of the heavy boardroom door closing was the final nail in the coffin. The executives stood up, murmuring angrily amongst themselves, shooting venomous looks at Marcus before filing out. They smelled blood in the water. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty, except for Marcus and me. The big screen still showed the crashed desktop. Marcus stood at the podium, staring at nothing. He looked shrunken, defeated. The arrogance, the charm, the facade, it had all been stripped away, leaving a terrified child in a grown man's suit. He slowly turned his head and looked at me at the back of the room. I hadn't moved. I stood perfectly still, holding my saucer, meeting his gaze. And then he saw it. It was a subtle shift in his eyes. The fog of panic cleared for a second, replaced by a horrifying realization. He looked at my calm face, my steady hands, my complete lack of surprise. He realized I wasn't devastated. He realized I wasn't even pitying him. He realized I knew. "You." His voice was a croak. He stumbled away from the podium, walking down the aisle toward me, using the chairbacks for support. "You knew this would happen." I didn't say anything. The hum of the projector cooling down filled the silence. He got closer. He looked wretched. His eyes were wild, searching my face for any sign of denial. "The budget errors," he whispered. "The vendor delays. You saw them all coming. You always did. Why didn't you warn me?" He reached out, grabbing my arm. His hand was clammy and weak. The smell of stale sweat was overwhelming. "Why didn't you fix it, Clara? You always fix it." I looked down at his hand on my gray cardigan. It looked alien. "I'm in administrative support, Marcus," I said calmly. "Fixing it wasn't my job." His grip tightened painfully. "You set me up. You let me take this knowing it was impossible. You wanted me to fail." He was starting to understand the depth of the trap he'd walked into. "I didn't make you take the project, Marcus," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You demanded it. You threatened me for it. You wanted the glory. You just didn't want the weight." I pulled my arm away from his grasp with a sharp tug. He stumbled back a step. "You killed me," he gasped, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. "No, Marcus, you killed me first. I just let you be the boss you always wanted to be," I said. Alone at the top, I placed the saucer quietly on the catering table. Clink. I turned and walked toward the door. "Clara, you can't leave me here," he yelled after me, his voice breaking into a sob. I opened the heavy door. The noise of the office outside, the phones ringing, people talking rushed in. Life was going on. I walked out, letting the door close slowly behind me, shutting away the sight of Marcus alone in the vast, cold room, standing in the wreckage of his own ambition. Act 4. The fallout was swift. Marcus was fired before the end of the day. Security escorted him out. He left with a single cardboard box, looking small and gray against the vibrant city backdrop. I didn't watch him leave. I was busy repotting a fern that had outgrown its container on my desk. The smell of the fresh potting soil was rich and earthy in the sterile office. 2 days later, I came home to find Marcus sitting on the steps of my apartment building. It was raining again, a soft, steady drizzle that made the streetlights blur on the wet pavement. He didn't have an umbrella. His expensive suit was soaked, ruined. His hair was plastered to his skull. He looked like a drowned rat. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, holding my grocery tote bag. It was heavy with real food vegetables, a loaf of crusty bread. He looked up. His eyes were hollowed out, dark circles branded beneath them. He had been crying or drinking or both. "Are you happy now?" he asked. His voice was flat, dead. I didn't answer immediately. I shifted the weight of the grocery bag. The canvas strap dug into my shoulder, a solid, real sensation. "I don't feel happy, Marcus," I said honestly. "I just feel done." "I lost everything," he whispered, staring at the wet concrete between his feet. "My job, my reputation. Henderson is suing me personally for negligence. I'm going to lose my condo. Everything." He looked up at me, a flicker of the old entitlement rising through the misery. "You could have stopped it. One word from you in that first meeting. You could have taken the project. You would have made it work. You always did." "And what would that have cost me?" I asked quietly. He looked confused. "Cost you? You would have gotten a promotion, a raise. It would have cost me my life," I said. He frowned. "Don't be dramatic, Clara." The rain intensified slightly, pattering against the leaves of the trees lining the street. "In another life, Marcus, I took that project," I said, looking past him, into the middle distance. "I worked the 80-hour weeks. I fixed your budget errors at 3 a.m. I took the abuse from Henderson so you didn't have to. And one night, my heart stopped at my desk because I gave everything I had to a job that didn't love me back. And you stepped over my body to make sure the slides were ready." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He thought I was speaking metaphorically. He thought I was insane. He couldn't possibly understand the literal truth of my words. "You were never a leader," I continued, my voice cold and clear as glass. "You were a parasite. You fed on my competence to sustain your ego. This time, I just refused to be the host." "You're a monster," he breathed, shivering in the cold rain. "No," I said. "I'm just someone who learned the value of her own time." I walked up the steps past him. I could smell the cheap gin on his breath now, cutting through the rain. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't have the energy left. I reached my door and put the key in the lock. The metal felt cold and secure. "What am I supposed to do now?" he called out to my back. A final, pathetic plea for me to fix his life. I opened the door. The warmth of my apartment rushed out to meet me. It smelled of basil from my window garden and clean laundry. "I don't know, Marcus," I said, not turning around. "Why don't you try doing the work yourself?" I stepped inside and closed the door. The click of the latch was soft, final. I put the groceries away. I made myself a sandwich with the crusty bread and fresh tomatoes I had grown. I sat by the window and ate it slowly, watching the rain fall on the city. The apartment was quiet. It wasn't a lonely silence. It was a peaceful one. The silence of a debt repaid, a balance restored. I had given Marcus exactly what he wanted, and it had destroyed him. I took a bite of the tomato sandwich. It tasted sweet, acidic, and incredibly real. I was alive. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, that was enough.